getting started at AMS training program. Perhaps you feel you're entering a new and exciting time in your life. Well, you are.
We were just a bunch of guys that were working together in this little office in the Pentagon, and we didn't relish the idea of going to work for some big company when we left the government. So we said, hey, let's start a company. Only two little problems. One is our sum total of business experience among 5 people was me working 1 year for a consulting firm. Not too much business experience. Second of all, we had really no idea what kind of a business to start. Okay, why would that slow us down?
The whole idea behind AMS was to get some bright people together who like to work with each other, to do something useful, to do something productive, and to make some money along the way, and we would figure it out.
AMS was founded by these brilliant 5 guys who worked for McNamara in the Department of Defense, and there was a name that those guys had, and it was the Whiz Kids. Joining the company that was founded by the Whiz Kids, that was a big deal to me. I'd never been in an environment where everybody was smarter than I was.
When we decided to start a business, we knew we'd need some capital to get launched. Steve Fenster, who was at Lehman Brothers in New York, he took it to a group in Lehman Brothers called Lehman Ventures, and they decided to finance us. They gave us $300,000 to get us launched.
Hugh Everett was absolutely key. I think we understood that from the beginning. That's why we gave him and his company Lambda 10% of the company ahead of time, because we really didn't have much software capability.
We didn't really know where we were going to go. We were making it up as we went for the most time. But what we did do is we did get one thing right. My mother was actually a good businesswoman, and she thought about it for a minute, and she said, well, do you have a plan B in case this computer stuff doesn't really amount to anything? And it turns out computer stuff did really amount to something. So, we got that one right.
The whole idea was it was a meritocracy. Everybody's ideas were important. Everybody should contribute. Everybody's ideas should be respected. And out of that would come the best thinking collectively that would then help us serve the clients in the best way.
This first day is a day that I'll never forget. I mean, how could you forget it when your child is born on the first day in the new job?
The ideas were unbelievably optimistic. I mean, from a planning point of view, we did try to figure out everything that might go wrong and do we have provisions for these. But emotionally, we never really doubted that, gee, this would work, and if it didn't work, we'll figure out something else that will work. We were gleeful.
It was a crazy place. Intense, challenging, exhilarating, and exhausting. But it was infused with humor, fun every day, and we were proud of what we were able to do day in and day out for our customers. If you don't see the world through the eyes of your customers, you have nothing.
So AMS had a culture of work hard, play hard, and work hard again. And what that did is create incredibly strong bonds among the AMSers.
People who are extremely bright, very sharp, very quick, very witty, and sometimes it was hand-to-hand combat, and it was survival of the fittest at times. But again, I think it created an esprit de corps.
At AMS, it was all about the people. You came and you fit in, and if you didn't pull your weight, you didn't last on a project for any length of time. There was a lot of hard work that went on, a lot of hours. People worked really hard. They played really hard. A lot of people were very young. They weren't married. They didn't have children early on. So AMS became a good portion of their life, and I believe many people at AMS have lifelong friends as well as spouses and partners that they met at AMS. I'm guilty of that myself.
I guess I sort of call it a kind of an era of anti-bureaucracy, in that we seem to go out of our way to minimize the rules and regulations. We don't run the company by the book, or certainly we don't run it by the printed book.
We work for 26 hours straight, and I remember putting 26 hours on my time card, taking it down to payroll, handing it to the person. She goes, there are only 24 hours, you can't put 26. And I was insistent, because I was so tired, that I had worked a 26-hour day.
From day one, I was learning about the AMS culture, and I learned about tough love. You did whatever you could to deliver your deliverables on time, even if you had to work around the clock. We realized that we had this walk through walls culture. Even if there was an unlocked door in that wall, we would walk through the wall anyway. It was really at AMS I learned the meaning of the saying, If it wasn't for the last minute, nothing would ever get done.
The project, that job, it was our life. We were there at all hours of the day and night, and everybody worked together. Most of us, I think, really loved it.
AMS was a great place to work, such a great place to work. People were smart, they were ethical, they worked hard. If you cared, you came in on Saturday. Also, we had free lunch too, that was one of the reasons.
Most of us worked on Saturday mornings, and so we bring our kids into the office to work. And that was not without mishaps. One Saturday morning, Bill Purdy's son, Stephen, stuck a screwdriver into the electrical outlet and caused a shockwave in the office.
The feeling that I have when I think back about AMS is that I literally grew up there, and it's a feeling of home almost. It's a very strange thing to describe a corporation that way, but a lot of these people are still my friends. I still see people socially. I still talk to people. We're spread out globally around the world, and I still hear from people.
I started in 1972 with a company with about 20 employees. And when I left as Chief Technology Officer, we had 10,000 people. This was not the same company, but it was still AMS.
I went to Bob Brayton and I said, "Hey, Bob, I need my own PC." And Bob laughed, and 30 seconds later, he was still laughing. And he said, "Do you think that every manager in America is going to buy every employee their own PC? You've got to be kidding. It would never be cost justified."
Well, I think the people that worked at AMS were extraordinary. The combination of making sure we got people that were, very smart, had good educations, were hard workers, and had team personalities really made things go.
Highlights in my arena were, oh my God, we just got so-and-so top of the class at Harvard. Those were the highlights, who we recruited and how we enticed kids. And they were kids, in those days, and mostly guys, I gotta say, mostly guys. How many women were graduating from Harvard Business School in those days? One of the ways that we enticed people was everybody got his or her own office. Now, imagine that in the days when everybody's working in these open spaces. If you were hired into AMS, even as a 21-year-old computer science graduate, you got your own office.
When I walked in for the interview with AMS, Mike Burke came in, sat down and started grilling me about technical details of VSAM and ISAM, and I immediately broke out in a terrible sweat. Walked out of there after about an hour and I said, man, I gotta chalk that up to experience. Nothing will ever come of that. I get a letter from Bev Riddick saying, we'd like you to come back to Arlington and interview some more. And I said, oh my God. And I went back to Virginia Tech to the placement office, and they asked me, he said, well, did you get a good salary? And I said, well, in 1974, I don't know if $11,000 a year was a good salary. But he said, yes, it was in the top 2% of salaries. And based on the number of hours I worked during my first year at AMS, I was probably being paid at about the same rate as somebody who takes tickets at a movie theater.
I knew that I had come to a place which was very, very different. Very, very innovative, very curious, very open-minded, and that's the impression I got. And it's the impression I had is this is a place that I must work in.
I was offered a job and rejected it. I remember Judy Tonelli called to raise the offer. I rejected it again. Ivan called and said, look, you've told us what you want to do. We've told you can do it here. Either you're lying to me or you're stupid. I quickly responded that my wife and I had decided we wanted to move to the West Coast for our first job out of school. He said, fine, we just opened a San Francisco office. You're hired.
And Ivan invited me out to lunch, and we went to a Chinese restaurant. So Ivan ordered in Chinese. I had no idea what we were getting. He ordered something that was spicy, fiery, hot. And I, of course, instantly put a chili pepper in my mouth and couldn't breathe. And that's when Ivan said, are you coming or not? And I was like, water, I gotta get some water. And the waiter came out and said, go away. I'm talking to this man. I want to know, are you coming or not? And I couldn't breathe. And finally I said, yes, I'm coming. That was my official acceptance. It was probably at that point as much to get some water as it was to actually join AMS.
My very first interview, actually at Purdue University, Milt Hess explained to me what AMS did to help save New York City from bankruptcy, and I was hooked.
The New York City project was definitely a defining moment, both for AMS and for me personally. I got a phone call from Steve Clifford. The city had not yet announced publicly that it was going broke. And I'm going to say that 2 weeks later, he had managed to get 5 years and $20 million to redo everything, and that he had read the paper I had written in 1973 saying that things were going to crash and here's what we should do to fix it. And he said, "You were right, and can you do that now?" Well, look, I can't do it for $20 million in 5 years. If we could do it in 18 months for $5 million, I could do it. But, okay, what's the trick there? And I said, well, the trick is no committees. You and I make all the decisions. And he said, I got that authority. We can do that. And so we were off and running.
40 plus years later, the great grandchild of that system, IFMIS, is still serving New York City, supporting a budget of over $90 billion.
One of my first projects at AMS was leading a project system called ODES. It was an ocean data evaluation system. And what it did was it collected and processed data for the Environmental Protection Agency. And one of the things I used to have to do was go out across the country and demonstrate the system to potential clients. And every time I did that, I had to dial in on a phone and with a modem. And every time I did it, it was a unique experience. So when that thing would hit and I would hear that shh and the thing would connect, that to me was exciting. And the ability to get that phone modem to work was like the biggest hurdle I ever had on every one of those presentations. Because once I got to the Connect and I showed the software, clients loved it. But sometimes it didn't work, and that was really stressful.
The Burlington Northern Railroad, it was the first $1 million project that AMS had. What it was trying to find out how to calculate the pay of engine drivers, railwaymen, union payroll. Okay. And it turned out to be a very, very complex affair. An engine driver is paid based on the weights of the engines that he drives. And then it was depending on the route that he was driving on. Because if you are east of a junction called Minot in North Dakota, that's all plain land, so he's paid at a certain rate. After Minot, the Rockies start, and he's paid at a different rate. Enormous amount of complexity like this. There were 3,000-4,000 ways of paying the guy. And I figured out a way to do it using, of all things, partial differential equations, which is pretty esoteric. I think basically Ivan and Fred looked through the papers, okay, and said, yeah, this makes sense.
I was involved in the computer science research lab at MIT before it was even called computer science. I certainly saw that there are going to be new technologies that we were all going to use. On the other hand, I dare say I was not one of those with the vision to realize where we are today, but I was one that wanted to make sure that AMS was at the forefront of whatever technology we could be that made sense for the business. We did a lot of things to make sure that as the technology advanced, AMS was right there at the forefront. We did a project for the Bank of Montreal, creating a web-based front end to our mortgage loan origination system. This was probably the first use of an online mortgage application system in the world, not just for our client. Even though it was a demonstration, it became the model for a number of things that we did over the coming years.
We were a leader in, we called it reusable systems. Today you would call them packages or whatever, but really we were among the first people to really try and, when we went from the New York City financial system and installed it in the District of Columbia and customized it for Columbia. That was the start of what today is considered perfectly normal of just having packages that people start with. And I think some of the technology infrastructure things we did, we called it the pattern in the problem. I think that was very innovative as well. So in some dimensions, we certainly were creative and innovative in the industry.
I got a call to go over to the CNO's office in the Pentagon, and they told us about this new project where they were concerned about the amount of weight on U.S. Navy ships. And a big culprit to the tune of multiple tons was actually paper. So I'm like, well, what is it that you want us to do with this paper, right? And he says, well, I want you to figure out some new technology so we don't have to have all these manuals. And he said, there's this new thing called an optical disc, and it's supposed to be a high-density storage device. I mean, he said up to like 1.3 gigabytes, and it's got to be able to help us. And that's how Papership started.
We were doing so much flying on the AARP project back and forth from Los Angeles to Dulles that we got to know the flight attendants very well, because we always took the same flight and it was always the same crew. But Doug always liked to have his drinks available when he was flying. And it got to the point where as soon as we would get on the plane and get seated and in the air, the flight attendants would take the cart to the front of the plane and start to serve. And Doug was he wasn't patient enough to wait for the cart to get all the way to the back. So the stewardesses gave him the permission to help himself to the bar at the back of the plane. And in return, he served all of the passengers in the back of the plane.
Well, the slogan for the contract was, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." And that idea came from a study that had been done that proved that a significant portion of the equipment failures in Navy ships were actually caused by people going in and doing preventative maintenance.
At AMS, we were never afraid to make big bets. One of the bets we made was related to tax systems. The bet was that we would only get paid if we were able to raise revenues to pay ourselves.
One of my best moments in the 90s was on the state of Kansas revenue system project, which was a very, very challenging project for us. But in the end of 1997, I remember this scene of a large project room with about 50 to 80 people surrounding a chair in the center of the room. And sitting in that chair is Jacob Varghese. Jacob was getting his head shaved, bald, and the reason for that is he had challenged his team to meet a certain technical deadline, and they won.
My project was LPS, which was the Life Cycle Productivity System, and it was in pieces, and we had to bring it all into one piece of software that we could sell and go out on clients and not only sell it, but train them and support it. The experience in the 80s of getting technology together was crazy, exciting, I mean, all of the above. And I made some of the best friends from that group. We had some of the craziest times. I remember playing Frisbee late at night because we just needed to get some, just take a break for a little bit. And it was getting to know the people and watching the finished product.
My favorite project, Proximus in Brussels, was pretty awesome because I felt like I had a lot of power. I was there even though we were contractors, I was representing the client on a project where other third-party vendors were there to develop a billing system. And as a representation of the client, I was able to say yay or nay and to make decisions as to what they needed to do or not do. And if I needed extra infrastructure and extra storage, all I had to do was say so and it happened. That's really cool.
I'd like to thank all of those people who took a great risk and go to Europe to start a business. I'd like to thank all of you who took that kind of risk and helped grow an important component of AMS that still survives today in CGI.
As we grew in Roslyn, we thought it would be best to try to get ourselves all together into one building, and that turned out to be the Kent Street office building. And I remember Ivan telling me when we started to plan for this, he said, Frank, he said, this can either be the Nikolai building or the Nikolai Memorial building.
One of the things that was really unique about AMS is we built such close relationships with our clients. When we ended up writing a big piece of software for a financial system or for an inventory management system, we said, gosh, this is a great idea. We could take this and sell it to other people. Most of our revenue and profitability still came from the people side, the consulting side. And that was one of the things that really attracted CGI to AMS in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And in 2004, CGI finally sort of consummated their purchase of AMS. We really worked to help them understand the value of software and software intellectual property and its impact on revenue and profitability. And eventually, CGI sort of got it and didn't just get it, but just took it like in its totality and created this program that was run by Mike Keating called IP30, where they decided that every business unit in CGI globally needed to get to a point or had a goal to have 30% of the revenue come from IP. And that, I think, is a huge legacy of AMS that continues today in CGI.
I feel privileged to pass on the consulting, leadership, client focus that's in my AMS DNA that now lives on in the CGI DNA.
I joined AMS in 1981 thinking I would stay for a short time. I stayed for 31 years. It was the only job I had. I met my husband at AMS. I always say it was one job, one husband, and the best time of my life.